Okay, back for lecture number 2 in the 30 Years' War. And at this point, we're going to see that there are, in fact, 4 phases to this war. The Bohemian phase, a Danish phase, a Swedish phase, and finally a French phase that then would culminate in the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. So the dates are 1618 to 1648. Again, an incredibly long period of fighting and conflict. We're not accustomed to this. As I said the other day in class, the wars that we typically are familiar with are usually 4 years, 5 years in duration, Vietnam War maybe being the exception in the 60s and early 70s. So the idea that the war extends over this 3-decade period should tell us and tell you that things are pretty complicated. There are going to be a number of different players involved, and the motives also change. So if it's true that these wars broke out, again, largely over differences in religious faith and confessions, it's also true that by the end of the wars, religion is going to recede into the background as the various players, in particular the Habsburg dynasty, is really going to be forced to concede religious toleration and coexistence of multiple different faiths, now including Calvinism, by the end of the war. So just to anticipate where we're going, from religion, we're going to move to geopolitics, and we're going to see that political considerations come to the fore and then really begin to dominate Europe in many ways. And also, I think it's true that the Habsburg dynasty, both in Spain and in Austria, begin to lose some of their luster. They begin to lose some of their power and their ability to shape events on a European scale. And remember, that was their dream, their age-old dream, to reimpose order and unity across Europe. Back to that duvet cover that I had mentioned with the Reformation, that disappears, and we're going to see the emergence of new players on the geopolitical stage, and those players are France, the Netherlands, and England, with Sweden making an appearance, and then later we're going to see Poland and or Russia farther to the east. But nonetheless, so we want to get right down to this Bohemian phase. The war broke out in 1618 in the province or the kingdom of Bohemia, which had been part of the Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg lands. And in fact, in 1618, Ferdinand of Styria, an Austrian province, and himself the son of the emperor, became the king of Bohemia. And so this should have been a rather peaceful transition, a new king, Ferdinand of Styria. The problem was, Ferdinand, being a Habsburg, was very Catholic, and Bohemia, by the time 1618 rolls around, had become very Calvinist. There was a very strong Calvinist minority. And Ferdinand, as the new king, comes in and kind of like a bull in a china shop, begins to put in place a policy to eradicate the Calvinist faith and to restore the Catholic faith. And he does so revoking what had been granted to Protestants in Bohemia, revoking their rights in what was known as the Letter of Majesty of 1575. So we see that previous Habsburg emperors, although very Catholic, had also taken the approach of Marie de Medici, in that, trying to put religious differences aside, some of the previous Habsburg emperors, in particular Rudolf II, extended rights and recognition to the Calvinist minorities in order to avoid problems. And it seemingly was a fairly practical policy. Ferdinand wanted nothing to do with it, and he comes in and, in a sense, in essence, orders Protestants nobility to suspend their meetings. And there was one such meeting in the capital city of Prague, and Ferdinand sent his officials to order the Protestant nobility to suspend all meetings in Prague, and this set off a rebellion. That is, the Protestants nobility meeting in Prague seized control of a central palace in Prague known as the Hradskind Castle. And at this point, there erupted a scuffle between the Protestants who had seized the castle and Ferdinand's Catholic officers who had been sent to close down these meetings. And what happened, you'll see here, is one of those famous moments in European history known as the defenestration of Prague. And this apparently was something that was done in these areas of Bohemia, that when you disagreed with your opponents and there was a window available to you, you would simply hurl them out of the window. And you see this, the Protestants on the left seizing the Catholic officials of Ferdinand and preparing to throw them out the window. And they did. They threw 3 officials out the window. They fell some 50 feet into the castle moat. Now, luckily for these Catholic guys, they survived because the moat had been filled with manure, refuse, and other things, so that cushioned their fall. So they got up, I think, somewhat badly bruised, but still alive. Yet this was going to set in motion a chain of events that would lead to outright war. Ferdinand was not going to take this sitting down. And in fact, in 1619, King Ferdinand of Bohemia now was elected the Holy Roman Emperor, and he becomes Emperor Ferdinand II. And you can see him there on the left. So not only was he the King of Bohemia, now he's Ferdinand II. Now, we need to go back to Bohemia, and we need to go back to the Palatine, because in the meantime, the Protestant nobility and leaders of Bohemia, having thrown out of the window the officials in the defenestration, also depose King Ferdinand as the King of Bohemia. So, do they have the authority to do this? Well, technically no, but they did. And they invite Frederick V of the Palatine to come to Bohemia and be their king. And you see Frederick V of the Palatine dressed as a king. The ermine robe, he has the staff, the sign of power, and he's holding the globe with the cross. So that is a projection of his universal authority and the religious blessings that came with it. Now remember that Frederick V is a Calvinist. So, and he's also still the Duke of the Palatine, or the leader of the Palatine. I'm not sure if he's a Duke or a King of the Palatine. So here's Frederick, and now he holds these 2 important positions within the Holy Roman Empire, and he has 2 electoral votes out of the 7. And now Emperor Ferdinand has a direct challenge to his authority, and that's really what's going to set off the war. And what happens is in 1620, Ferdinand, a Habsburg from Austria, now emperor, is able to call on his Spanish relatives, Habsburgs, kings of Spain, and the Spanish send troops to help Ferdinand quell the revolt in Bohemia. And it's the Spanish troops together with Maximilian I of Bavaria, so that context that we did in the previous lecture. So we have Maximilian of Bavaria coming into the picture as well to aid Ferdinand to put down and suppress this rebellion. And they're successful. So Maximilian I is able to stop the Calvinists, and this occurs at the Battle of White Mountain, which you can see pictured here, this massive battle. And what I think you also see is the armies have grown in size and in sophistication and in armaments, etc. But in fact, the Catholic forces are able to defeat Frederick V at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620. And then by 1622, Ferdinand succeeds in pacifying all of Bohemia, restoring the Catholic Church to its rightful place. And he also was able to conquer the Palatine, where Frederick V had come from. And so what happens is the dream announced by the Rosicrucian pamphlets of a Protestant-wide European settlement is crushed. And so that idea that the Protestants, and in particular that Frederick V himself would be the restorer of peace and unity in Europe, disappears. And what we see happening then is that Maximilian of Bavaria, the Duke of Bavaria, is going to continue the war on behalf of Catholics by moving into northern principalities and territories of the Holy Roman Empire, again to reclaim lands and territories that had become Lutheran or Calvinist. And so this is going to set in motion the idea of this war that's going to undergo various phases. And so, in fact, we're going to switch to the second phase. That's known as the Danish phase, 1625 to 1628. Some would say 1629. I've tried to include this map that shows the principal seats of war in the 30 Years' War, so it's a bit confusing, but I did circle in black the idea of Denmark. Denmark actually had several territories that it controlled outright in the Holy Roman Empire. So Christian the Fourth of Denmark, that is the King of Denmark, himself a Lutheran, sees the advances of the Duke of Bavaria and Maximilian I, and he becomes quite agitated and concerned that the Catholic forces are going to roll all the way up through the northern territories of the Holy Roman Empire and reclaim them for the Habsburgs and for Catholicism. And so Christian IV is going to be persuaded that it would be a good idea to himself take Danish forces with help now from France, England, and the Dutch Netherlands. So now we see not only Denmark becoming involved in the war, but we see France, England, and the Dutch Netherlands. So what again began as an internal dispute within the Holy Roman Empire is internationalized. And I think we've heard that before with France, we've heard that before with the Netherlands, and it occurs yet again. So there's a clear pattern here. And what I think we begin to see here is this very early nascent idea of balance of power. That is when the Catholic forces begin to roll up victories and begin to reclaim lands for the Habsburg dynasty and the Catholic Church. Other nations, some of them Protestant, such as Denmark and England and the Netherlands, begin to fear that there's going to be a shift in the balance of power towards the Catholic Church. Therefore, they intervene. So what we see here are the early workings of the international system, and that system ultimately is going to try to achieve balance. So think of sort of a seesaw and that idea of balance. And I think this is what in large part explains Denmark's intervention in the war. Now, Christian IV and the Danish forces are going to be, in fact, defeated by Maximilian I of the Bavarian Catholic League. And so his efforts to stop the Catholic advances fail. And at this point, there's a rather interesting side story. Emperor Ferdinand II really begins to become suspicious of Maximilian I. He's a very powerful person in his own right, commanding this major army that's rolled up a series of victories, and Ferdinand begins to fear that he himself might be challenged by Maximilian I for control in the Holy Roman Empire. So there's still internal tensions and divisions between the emperor and his great nobles. So Maximilian is, in fact, fired by Ferdinand I, and he's replaced by a new general, Albrecht of Wallenstein, who is going to continue the fight on behalf of Emperor Ferdinand II and the Habsburgs. And he is going to, in fact, Wallenstein then is going to lay waste to the Danish kingdom in 1628 with an army of some 100,000 men. And it's at this point then that we see the Catholic forces having largely succeeded in the first two phases of the war, the Bohemian and the Danish phase. And Emperor Ferdinand wastes no time in trying to make good on his victories on the battlefield by issuing what is known as the Edict of Restitution of 1629. And that was a document that reaffirmed in its entirety the Peace of Augsburg of 1555. Now, remember that the Peace of Augsburg did not recognize Calvinism. And so what Ferdinand wants to do is clearly, once and for all, refuse steadfastly to recognize the Calvinist Reformed churches. And the idea was that all church lands taken by Protestants would be returned to the Catholics. And the date of that return of lands would be all the way back in 1552. I'm sorry for the spelling on the slide there, misspelling on the slide there. And that was rather a large number of areas. There were 16 individual bishoprics and 28 towns in all that the Lutherans and Calvinists had captured since 1552, and they all had to be returned to the Catholic Church. So this is a major shift in terms of land and allegiance and peoples, and that's really going to cause a lot of fear, again, amongst the other nations in Europe, and that's what's going to lead to the appearance of Sweden. We don't often think of Sweden as a major military power or a major player in the international system, though it was, and in fact, the Swedes are among the first people to settle areas here in Pennsylvania and Delaware. Christiana, Delaware, is named after the Swedish Queen Christina, and there's something called Old Swedes Church in Philadelphia. So we tend to overlook the Swedes, so my job is to make you aware that the Swedes at one point were a major power, and the Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus, is really going to have a harsh reaction to the Edict of Restitution, as did many other Protestant rulers across Europe. And so you might think that after the Danish are defeated, that this war would come to an end, and lo and behold, it does not, because the Swedish are going to get themselves involved in this war. And you see there the Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus, a man on a horse, projecting his power, his majesty, his strength, and he was in fact quite a warrior. I've also tried to show with the map there, you see Sweden, a Lutheran kingdom, and they're going to send their army across the Baltic Sea and begin an invasion in the northern territories of the Holy Roman Empire. What's also interesting is France becomes involved at this point in around 1630. Remember that Henry IV, the Bourbon king, was assassinated by Ravaillac in 1610. Henry IV's successor was Louis XIII. Now, Louis XIII himself was a child when he became king, so he had a series of regents, the Queen Mother and this Catholic cardinal by the name of Richelieu, who you really need to know. He's a rather stern, austere man, but he was also very astute and shrewd, and I think, again, a student of Machiavellian type politics, that is, the lion and the fox. What France does cleverly is they don't send troops into these conflicts, these wars. At this point, they will later. But France begins to provide money to the Protestant combatants. And France is a wealthy country. It has a large peasant population. They farm, they produce, and they generate a great deal of wealth, and they're able to then use some of that wealth to fund their foreign policy. And you might think it strange that France, being a Catholic nation, would aid the Protestants against the Habsburgs, who are also Catholic. So here's where we begin to see the idea of religious differences fade and the idea of geopolitical interests come to the fore. And France really wanted to avoid that idea that I mentioned in class of encirclement. If you look at the Austrian Habsburgs, the Spanish Habsburgs, and the Spanish Habsburgs control the Netherlands to the north. They control parts of Italy. So France really felt that it was surrounded by the Habsburg dynasty, and it wanted to sort of break that encirclement. And one of the ways that Richelieu decided to do that was to aid the Protestants in their wars against the Habsburgs. And France has a history of doing this. France, previously in the 1520s, had made alliances with the Ottoman Empire, something they would do again in the 1600s, again to cause trouble for the Habsburgs. So this is one of those great moments of transition from religious problems and confessional problems to the geopolitical. So having said that, we see that the Swedish are going to invade, as I said already, in 1630, and initially things didn't go all that well for the Swedes. They are not really well received necessarily by the Germans in the areas that they invade, but there was one event that occurred in 1631, in May of 1631, that's really going to swing the Germans and especially the Protestants around to the Swedish cause, and that was the destruction of the city of Magdeburg, and I kind of circled that in black up there. The Catholic League and its forces completely lay waste to this Protestant town. It had been sort of the jewel of Protestant towns in northern Germany, and they destroyed the buildings. They killed the inhabitants, indiscriminately killing women and children and old people, killing upwards of 20,000 people. This is a major atrocity of war, is what we would call it today. And that term doesn't apply then, so it's anachronistic to say that. But just to get you to understand that this was a really serious act that really upset, obviously, the Protestants. And they see the Catholic League behaving like this. And so what it does is it swings the Protestant forces, the Protestant princes, over to King Gustavus Adolphus and the Swedish cause. And they join forces with him. And then on September 17th, 1631, the Protestants defeat the Catholic forces at the Battle of Breitenfeld. And this is going to set in motion a series of offensive maneuvers by King Gustavus, the Swedish king, who is going to invade and, in fact, take control of the Rhineland and the city of Mainz, and he's going to also invade the Catholic stronghold of Bavaria. So at this point, we have the Swedish army aided and assisted by France and the Dutch Republic and the obvious German Protestant princes on the move across large areas of the Holy Roman Empire. And again, large armies tended to be very disruptive and also very destructive. And at this point, Ferdinand, Emperor Ferdinand II, has to really regroup, and at one point, I forgot to mention this earlier, after the Edict of Restitution, Ferdinand thought he was in a pretty good position, so he sends his army home. He disbands his army. He sends his general Wallenstein packing. He doesn't want challenges from an army general. He sends him packing, but now in 1631 he realizes that was a mistake, and he has to quickly reorganize his imperial army, recall Wallenstein back to service, and meet the Swedish threat. And that is going to happen at the famous Battle of Lutzen. And I don't know whether I have that here in this slide. In 1632, November of 1632, Gustavus himself, the Swedish king, is going to be killed in battle. So again, the imperial army, headed by the General Wallenstein, is able to now defeat the Swedes, and that, you might think, would end the war. However, one of Gustavus's important right-hand man, a chancellor by the name of Axel Oxenstierna, took up the fight and continued the Swedish advances and war in the Holy Roman Empire. And that was really to, again, protect the idea of Sweden and its interests, its Lutheran interests. But Sweden also had designs on northern territories, Pomerania up on the Baltic Sea, so that it could expand its ability to trade. And they're going to continue this fight. Now, meanwhile, the idea, Oxenstierna also organized the Heilbronn League of Protestant princes to assist him in continuing the fight in the areas of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1634, Wallenstein, the Catholic general, is assassinated. So again, we see this idea of leaderships being assassinated, and there were suspicions that Wallenstein had personal ambitions of land and power, and that he might not be working in the best interests of the Habsburg family and the empire. So command of the imperial army now passes to Ferdinand's son, the Archduke Ferdinand. Kind of confusing. Fathers name their sons after them. And in September 1634, the Archduke joined his imperial army with a large Spanish army. Again, the Habsburg family connection. And they inflict a massive defeat on the Swedes and the Heilbronn League at the Battle of Nordlingen. So at this point, in 1634, the Catholics are back in control with the Archduke Ferdinand, and you can see that this is the Battle of Nordlingen, pictured here, and that leads to the promulgation of the preliminary peace treaty of Pirna Preliminaris. And the terms of the treaty, which I didn't list there, are the following. The area of Saxony was going to be given Lusatia and Bavaria. Bavaria was given to the Palatinate. Alliances with any foreign powers were forbidden. The date of restitution for all Catholic lands would be 1627, not 1552, and the Edict of Restitution would be suspended for 40 years. And that was to give time for the sides and tensions to cool. And so really, there's several lands being switched back and forth. What was happening was the major nobles that aided the Habsburgs, in Saxony and in Bavaria were given Protestant lands, so that they could be, restored to the Catholic faith. And this is going to lead to, this preliminary peace treaty is then going to lead to the Peace of Prague, 1635, and this was agreed to by the major German princes. And you would think at this point, if the major German princes have agreed to end hostilities, having defeated the Swedes, that maybe the Swedes at this point would be tired after 4 years of war, having lost also their great king, that the war would come to an end, and that is not the case again because of France. And we see that France is going to now intervene directly with its own troops into the conflict, and is going to persuade and convince the Swedes not to leave the field of battle, but to continue the war. And so we have this Franco-Swedish alliance that, though was difficult and ineffective and messy at times, a series of treaties between the two nations between 1636 and 1641 paved the way for a very effective alliance against the Habsburgs, both in Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. So now at this point, we see the complete internationalization of this war. And I think what we see, too, is that religion has really kind of receded to the background, and now we're really talking about imbalance of power between the major nations of Europe. In 1637, Emperor Ferdinand II died, and his son, Ferdinand, the Archduke, becomes Emperor Ferdinand III. And Ferdinand III really wanted to preserve the terms of the Peace of Prague. So Ferdinand III takes a different position from that of his father, and he wants to sort of stop the hostilities. Yet the French and the Swedes are going to press on the idea of continuing this war to weaken the Habsburgs. In 1638, we see French forces capturing most of the Alsatian provinces and a key fortress that cut the Spanish road connecting northern Italy to the Netherlands. So this is going to be a major blow to the Spanish Habsburgs. At the same time, the Swedish army defeated the Saxons and invaded Bohemia again. In 1640, the French and Swedish armies actually linked up in lands in the Holy Roman Empire and began fighting jointly with a combined force of 40,000 men. And they wreaked havoc on areas that they passed through. Think of Sherman's March to the Sea in 1864. So now we're going to see continuing misery, devastation, famine, disease spread over wide areas of the Holy Roman Empire. And in fact, in 1642, the Swedes marched through Silesia and into Moravia after briefly threatening Vienna. And the Swedes destroyed the main imperial army at the Second Battle of Breitenfeld in 1642. So at this point, in 1642, once again, the imperial army has been defeated. Many of the lands of the Holy Roman Empire have been devastated. And in fact, the Spanish are going to be defeated by the French at Rocroi in 1643. In 1640, the Portuguese rebel against the Spanish and reclaim their independence. So there's a lot that's going on with this war as it enters into its final stages. And it's at this point that after a string of defeats and bad luck for the Habsburgs, they enter into negotiations, and Ferdinand III enters into negotiations that begin in 1643. Now, the interesting thing is, though they're negotiating to settle the war and find a peaceful settlement to the war, that is, the fighting continues. So each side sees that by continuing to press the battlefield, press the war forward on the battlefield, that they can strengthen their bargaining position at the peace negotiations. And that, in fact, is going to happen. And it is true that the French and the Swedish are going to come out on top of the continued conflicts. from 1643 to 1648, which really drive the Habsburgs into a position where they have to sort of submit and recognize that things were now not in their favor anymore. And that's going to lead to the final treaty, that is the Peace of Westphalia. And you can see their members gathered at two cities, Münster and Osnabrück. It's really interesting. The Catholics and the Protestants would not agree to meet at the same place at the same time, so they met in separate cities, and they sent the proposals back and forth between these two cities that were separated actually by about 30 miles. So it really kind of slowed down the process. But from 1643 to 1648, they hammer out the details of the Peace of Westphalia. Westphalia, by the way, is the region or state in Germany in which we find these two cities of Münster and Osnabrück, which again are mentioned in your textbook. So the negotiations lead to the treaty on October 24th, 1648. You see a copy of the pages with signatures and the wax seals listed there. And here's what the major terms include. Independence for the Dutch Republic, which is going to be a Protestant republic. There's still the Spanish Netherlands that separate France and the Dutch Republic to the north. But the Dutch finally gained their independence and will become a major player and power in world commerce in the 1600s. Inside the Holy Roman Empire, the princely states were recognized as independent members of the imperial diet, and the princes had the right to determine their religion, including Calvinism, in their lands. And there are going to be a series of independent states that sort of confirms the idea of the composite nature of the Holy Roman Empire. The Habsburg family obviously is going to lose control over the Holy Roman Empire, yet they retain their lands in Austria and Bohemia, and will continue to rule those lands all the way down to 1918. The date of repossession of Catholic lands was set January 1st, 1624, and this is a big gain for the Protestants, so that the Protestants didn't have to return those bishoprics and lands to the Catholics. The Elector Palatine was restored to the Lower Palatinate, while Maximilian I of Bavaria was given the Upper Palatinate and made an elector. So both the Protestants and the Catholics gain something within the Holy Roman Empire here. Saxony is going to keep areas of Lusatia. Brandenburg gains East Pomerania, the duchies of Mark and Cleves, and several Catholic bishoprics. So again, we see territorial settlements. We don't really need to worry about all the details, but just know that there are these territorial settlements. And we're going to see that, again, Ferdinand III received the hereditary titles in Bohemia and Silesia. At this point, the 30 Years' War comes to an end. And I think in short, the convulsions that rocked much of Europe really lead to a new world order. And that is a world order in which states are now recognized as sovereign and independent. I forgot to mention too that the Swedish cantons become also independent state, an independent nation state, and recognized by the other powers. And what we see is that the confessional differences and religious differences really are going to disappear, and there's going to be an age of toleration and acceptance. And I think this is a step towards modernity and the idea of pluralism and the idea of peaceful coexistence. What we also see here, and I think this is important, is the end of this medieval dream of a unified Europe under one emperor, under one faith, that would direct the course of human history to its logical and divinely ordained conclusion. So the Catholic faith under a Catholic emperor had this very big, grandiose idea that they were helping God help humanity reach salvation, and that this was a divinely ordained conclusion. Well, all of that goes out the window, and now we have multiple states that will compete, and there will be multiple faiths and confessions that will coexist. And I think this is really then the dawn of the modern world. And we're going to see that develop in the 1600s. And I think what we see then is the old ideas, the old verities or truths are going to be challenged continually by new realities. And Western society is going to show itself, I think, very able to adapt and to new situations. And I think that's what creates this dynamic quality to Western civilization and society, that it's able to respond to challenges and adapt, though not without a considerable amount of suffering and misery caused by these wars. But the ultimate settlement then is going to pave the way towards a modern world. Thank you.